This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
When I get into this situation where I think a lot of people look at the Alan Greenberg type cases and they go, oh, that's a 30-minute episode or that's an hour or whatever. And I'll spend like 5 hours talking about them because there's something so interesting about it that I think we're missing. And I don't like to go, well, if she didn't kill herself, it has to be a homicide. Let me make a fake homicide out of this, because I feel like that's what could potentially be done in some of these cases, whether it's the Elliott Smith type case or whether it's Alan Greenberg. I think that in rare instances, that is how we end up with a situation where a person is on trial for a non-crime. Like it's not a crime. It's a tragedy, but it's not a crime. Then I get into these other cases that drag out for years and years, and I wonder, like, well, how did that happen? That brings us sort of to today's case, which came up, like, I've talked about this case before, and I used a clip about this case, but it was sort of in conjecture when we were first covering, like, this sprawling possibilities list that I had of Israel Keyes, and this isn't related to Israel Keyes. The more you dig into it, this is a case that is from 2011. It's from July, and I did not know that this July 2011 case still has sort of legal motion going forward. Did you know that? Did you know there were still things going on?
Well, just to be clear, I did know that, and right now, what is sort of pending is the family is attempting to get the entire investigative file, and a judge has ordered that law enforcement produce that file or produce why they can't produce that file. And I believe that's where it's at. That's as far as I saw it going. Are you aware of anything else that's happening?
No, I have now started digging into this because of that. And this is one of those cases that's the part that's interesting to me. I believe that everything should be open to the world, but I don't see how it'll necessarily change what's happened. And this is a suicide or homicide case that got considerable attention because it has a very unusual element to it.
I just want to be really clear. When I am like immediately like a naysayer of saying, oh, that's not a homicide, it's a suicide. It's not that I want somebody to get away with murder, okay, ever. But it's more like I don't want to be blasting someone that, committed suicide. Like, do you see where those two things like contradict each other?
Yeah. And honestly, were it not for the more recent developments in this case, so Ellen Greenberg, I'm not straddling the fence there. I don't think that guy killed her. I don't necessarily think she plotted a suicide. I think that what happened to her was a tragedy because of an avoidable medical interaction or pharmaceutical interaction that she and potentially the provider were just completely unaware of.
Right. She was not in control of it.
Yeah, it was something that happened that we, just as society, we don't really have a category for that. It's not an overdose. It's not technically a toxicity or poisoning issue. It's not technically a suicide. The case that we're talking about today is a little weirder than that because there were other things going on around it.
And I'm really glad you brought this case up because it illustrates a point of I think what we've both been trying to get at.
What do you feel like that point is?
Most of the time, what I see is suicides, they remain suicides as far as like, the autopsy report, the medical examiner's findings, and then the family pushes it in other ways, right?
Yeah.
So there's not anybody like being charged with a crime. It's just the family is in complete disbelief of the fact that their loved one committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
And just like I would be if it happened to one of my loved ones, they are set on getting justice for their loved one who is said to have committed suicide, and they know that they didn't commit suicide, right?
Yeah.
And so they develop sort of this tunnel vision. And I don't want to say it yet because it'll give away the case, but in this case, it's sort of like, from everything I've read, the family like fighting it and everything, it's like, oh, she would never do that. But there's almost always something that like you would never expect to have happened that happens. And it's part of a, like, not to do with this, the suicide itself or the death itself, but it's circumstances in life that are occurring that you really have no idea how someone would react to them, because like, when does this ever happen?
Yeah, and they took a pretty unique approach here. As you mentioned, they have gone after the agencies involved, and they've gotten some, I would call them semi-favorable rulings. One of my problems with cases where law enforcement agencies are stifling the files, that's the word I would use, is they're suppressing them to some degree. Sometimes that's for a really good reason. Sometimes it's because it's an investigative file, and that's really where like a lot of personal details and stuff get involved with people who aren't necessarily the victim of the crime, because investigators, if they're really good investigators, and you never know until way after the fact, and even then it's sort of a subjective opinion. If the investigators are good, they have dug so deep into the people sort of in the immediate orbit, and that's not necessarily family members, because sometimes like it could be groups of friends, it could be acquaintances, it could be strangers, relatively speaking, that they have reason to suspect they are a witness, a person of interest, or potentially a suspect in a crime. They dig deep into that, and they store all of this in one master set of investigative files. And that's not just the autopsy. It's all of the interviews. It's a lot of the warrants that come about. And the way that investigators are able to hold back details there is for one of two reasons. One is if it is a personal detail that really has no business being out in the world, then that can be any number of things. It could be medical information. It could be relationship information. Whatever it is, it just wouldn't come to light otherwise, were it not just stuck in this investigative file. And sometimes it's not to rule people in, it's that ruled people out. The other thing that they will hold back, suppress, or not disclose information, the other reason is because it could potentially hinder the investigation or prosecution. And that's sort of twofold, but the investigation is what leads to the prosecution, and it doesn't have to be case related. It does not necessarily have to be related specifically to this case. It could be their methods. It could be that they don't want to disclose sources. It could be a number of things that they're just protected by statute. I guess I'll say protected by statute to protect the investigation and to protect a potential prosecution.
Right. And so when you go for a records request, there's a, number of things that the records custodian can deny your request and cite the particular statute. And they have to do with all the stuff that you were just saying, just, protecting an investigation. It's usually never like, no, you can't have this, right? I mean, just because I said so. There's a reason for it. And, sometimes the reasoning is like the stuff, it really wouldn't matter if it was released, but it happens to fall under a situation where in a different case, it might matter, right? And so it's pretty broad. Now, you say that, and kudos to you for believing that. I mean, I think that would be the optimal situation. In this particular case, I think that what is being sought after here by in the civil. Basically the family is just asking for the entire file, right?
They
And
want to do their own investigation.
they just want every piece of information that's been gathered. And unfortunately, I don't think they're holding anything back. I think that it's lacking. And I think that even though like perhaps they have the whole file, because I don't see, like I look through like what was sort of available, right? I mean, I did a pretty extensive look at this case, and I can't imagine like what they're trying to get, right?
Yeah.
Because everything's out there. Like everything I need to know about the case was out there. And, unless I didn't find the filing where they had responded to the judge's order. And this happened late 21, right? So we're just like a couple months out here. But, the judge had said, look, you've got to turn over the whole file, and anything that is protected under statute or for whatever reason, you've got to cite that stuff. And so basically the judge is trying to get an overall look at what the complete file is. And I think it's going to end up being that like whatever they've gone to court and are seeking, I don't think it exists.
Yeah. So I get told no a lot. And generally speaking, it happens like you were describing, and that is I'm told no because of this particular statute in this particular area. I mean, the most amount of no's I've ever gotten have been in Massachusetts, Colorado, weirdly, Florida, which has very loose open record laws. North Carolina has had some no's for me, and Texas and California were the two that like I repeatedly asked for information, and they basically said no. And I say Texas is a big one for me. I hear you snickering over there because you know how much I hate this one. There's a couple of cases in Texas that I feel like I'm entitled to some information, and they keep hiding behind these old cases, and it makes me very angry when they do that. Because
and I don't understand why you're angry about it.
I get angry because I feel like, just like you were describing, what makes me angry is when nothing is done about something. And it's not that I'm even asking because I want the information they have. It's because I'm asking because I want to prove that information that should be there is not there.
Well, I am fascinated with like your records request and getting stuff, and not being able to get stuff, and but like I said in a recent previous episode, like sometimes when you tell me you're asking for stuff, I'm like, why on earth does he think? Well, one, that you would be entitled to it, but like that it even exists. I think to myself, they don't have that. Like, there's no way. It's just interesting because that's not something normal people talk about, I'm sure. But to get information on some of these cold cases, some of this stuff, because you have certain expectations after you've done case after case after case, you expect like to be able to find certain things, right? And when it's not there, it used to be like, oh, conspiracy. Like I'm talking about how I would look at it. And ooh, something's going on there. And then like after a certain amount of time passed, I realized like, oh, it's just incompetent investigators.
Yeah, okay. I think, and I'm going to play the other side of the fence for a second. I don't disagree that sometimes it's incompetence, but sometimes it's, you know what? There's 24 hours in a day, and I don't work all 24 hours in that day. So I didn't get to that thing. And like sometimes it's completely legit. You know what I mean?
Okay. So in my opinion, maybe that was a little harsh, because if you skip it just because, you needed to sleep, it's still an incomplete investigation. I guess I shouldn't say incompetent, because I do think I honestly believe that investigators are out there, like they do the very best that they can. I don't think investigators go, I'm not dealing with that, and just, ignore stuff for the most part. But I think that there could always be more thorough things available, right? And I hate it that I feel that way, but I don't think it's like this huge conspiracy situation. With this case, there was a headline skimming kind of issue that occurred. It wasn't the most recent thing. I believe it was like 17, 18, or 19, right? The year. Because it's had so many things in court, essentially.
Yeah.
I wrote you kind of a long message, and then you like never responded to it. So I'm not sure I don't know if you know what I'm talking about when I say that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
How recent was your message to me?
It was yesterday.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so here, just as an example, and this was sort of rampant in the research of this, and this is going to give the case away, but. So in an article that is just randomly, I mean, it's not like super mainstream media, but it's, one of the first things that comes up on Google. The headline is, "A Suicide No Longer. A jury finds Rebecca Zehu was killed at the Spreckles mansion." Okay, that's an article. I'm not going to say who wrote it, but it was published April 9th, 2018. And it goes on to reveal information about the findings that a jury found Adam Shacknai, who was the brother of Rebecca's boyfriend, Jonah. They found him in a civil lawsuit that he was responsible.
Civilly responsible?
Civilly responsible for
her wrongful death?
Wrongful death. That's what I couldn't think of it. Wrongful death and battery. All right. And so the headline is, "A Suicide No Longer. A jury finds Rebecca Zehu was killed at the Spreckles mansion." All right. I mean, if you just skim that headline, what do you think?
You think that he was found guilty because they don't it's clickbait. They're sucking you in to read what's in that article and get those sweet advertising dollars or something. I don't know. It's really.
Oh, so you really think that that was it? Because I think this person legitimately believes what they've written.
Oh, that could be the case.
That's what I'm getting at. Is they think that because he would a jury found that he was responsible in a civil wrongful death and battery suit.
Yeah, the family sues him for $10 million. The jury found that he is potentially responsible. That's the finding, is responsible. It's not guilty, it's responsible.
Well, right. They ruled in the plaintiff's favor against the defendant, and it's a civil case for monetary damages. However, if you dive really deep into what the actual law is saying in this particular case, it has nothing to do with crimes being committed. Okay. The jury had absolutely no say in her manner of death. So they didn't decide if she committed suicide or not. Right.
Right.
They were presented with evidence as to what happened, and a preponderance of evidence showed that in some capacity, something that he did could have led to her death, which could also be said could have led to her committing suicide. And then there was also a battery element of that.
Yes.
But
so let's get into this case and talk about it so you can expound on some of that. I do want to point out one thing, though, and that is that the way that judgment gets wrapped up is there is actually, before final arguments were presented to the judge, the insurance company and Rebecca Zehu's family had reached a settlement for considerably less.
It was actually the verdict went through, but on the motion for it to be set aside is
right.
when that all occurred, because there was a really good chance that. And actually, it all comes down to insurance in these types of things. But the actual defendant, the man the suit was aimed at, he had no say in it whatsoever.
Right.
It was the insurance company's attorneys and their representatives, and they're the ones who said, "Okay, why don't we skip the rest of this appeals process? We're going to give you, however much money, and this is going to end," right?
Yeah.
In headline skimming, they've changed you know,
The whole
that
narrative.
that she was murdered and that he was responsible and that the court said he did it. But really, that's not at all what was said.
Well, so Rebecca Mawil Zahau, also known as Rebecca Nalepa, was found hanging at the Spreckles Mansion in Coronado, California on July 13th, 2011. She was pronounced dead by first responders called to the residence. Her death occurred 2 days after 6-year-old Max Shacknai, who is the son of her boyfriend, Jonah Shacknai, that we were just talking about. He had fallen from the staircase of this mansion and was in critical condition in a hospital. Rebecca and her younger sister, Zena, were the only people present at the time of Max's fall. Subsequently, 3 days later, on July 16, 2011, Max died of his injuries. So this is a 6-year-old that died that sort of kicks all this off. Rebecca was Burmese. She had been born to Burmese parents in Burma. And she came from a family that is listed as being of Chin ethnicity. And she was raised as a Protestant. She lived in Nepal and Germany, and she moved to the U.S. in 2001, give or take. Her parents and most of her family members live in St. Joseph, Missouri. She had an older sister, Mary Zahau Lerner, a younger sister, Snoham Horwath, who lives in Germany, and she had a teenage sister named Zena Zahau. There were other siblings involved, but those are the ones that are publicly listed. In August of 2009, when she had been here about 7.5 years, she was arrested for shoplifting when she stole $1,000 worth of jewelry from a Macy's in Phoenix, Arizona. She pled guilty to that. She was listed as married at the time to a 36-year-old nursing student named Neil Nalepa from Scottsdale, Arizona. In February of 2011, they were officially divorced. And she had worked as an eye care professional up until December of 2010. In 2008, Rebecca began dating Jonah Shacknai, who at the time was the CEO of Medicis Pharmaceutical. When she started dating him, she still would have been married to Neil. Shacknai's position at Medicis made him the 9th highest paid CEO in Arizona. He earned $6.4 million in 2010. He had 2 previous marriages, one to Kimberly James, which resulted in a divorce and a 3-year custody fight over the couple's 2 children. And he had a son, Maxfield Aaron Shacknai, with his second wife, Dina Romano. And so Max is sort of at the heart of this. And by the way, he did pretty well when Medicis Pharmaceutical was sold. And this would have been in 2011. They sold big portions of their system. I guess you'd call it a system. It was called the Liposonics. It's an ultrasound device that helps destroy fat deposits in the belly fats. So
You mean he did pretty well financially?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. What I was going to say was so Valiant Pharmaceuticals ends up purchasing Medicis while Jonah is the CEO and chairman for $2.6 billion. And he moves on to other jobs at that point. This case is not really about Jonah. Jonah is involved peripherally and civilly, but as you mentioned, really had no say in what was happening there. It was really between the decedent's family and an insurance company. But let's talk about Max's death for just 1 second. On July the 11th of 2011, Zena, Rebecca, and Max were at this place, the Spreckles Mansion, which Shacknai used as a summer estate. At some point during that day, Max fell face first over a second-floor banister, suffering injuries to his spinal cord and to his face. The former, meaning the spinal cord injuries, the former injuries affected his heart rate and his breathing. Rebecca said that she was in the bathroom at the time. She found Max moments after it happened. He was not breathing. He was unresponsive. So Zena called 911, and Max was taken to Rady Children's Hospital. Because of the brain damage he had suffered, it caused oxygen deprivation. And 5 days after the accident happened, he died from his injuries. On July 26, investigators ruled that the boy's death was an accident, and they speculated that somehow he tripped. A trauma doctor who examined Max prior to his death and his autopsy stated to police that he did not believe that injuries from the fall were consistent with a cardiac arrest and brain swelling that he experienced. And he suggested that Max may have suffocated prior to his fall. That has all sorts of sources attached to it. You can actually go on Wiki and they have it listed out pretty similar to what I just said. There is no final ruling except for the accident related to Max's death.
And just to be clear, what that would be implying is that, like, basically he was suffocated to death somehow, and then somebody threw him over the banister to make it look like he fell, right?
Or that was one scenario that was posited. The other scenario that was posited was someone either had their hand over his face or their hands around his neck prior to that action. Like, say someone larger than him had grabbed him and was like holding him and making it so that he could not necessarily breathe, and he was acting out in some way to get away from them, and the fall came from that. There were a number of scenarios they said were possible. It included like him having his face like pressed into someone's chest and being dragged, or having his face being suffocated by a fabric material object could have easily like resulted in him fighting with that person and falling, and that being like the fall being an accident, but the previous action not necessarily being accidental. They don't go any further with that because of what happens next. On July 12th, 2011, Rebecca drops off Xena at the airport, and Xena flies back to Missouri. And then she picks up Adam Shacknai, who's Jonah's brother, who is arriving there from Memphis, Tennessee. So Rebecca, Jonah, and Adam eat dinner with a friend named Howard that evening, and Adam and Rebecca return to Spreckles Mansion. Jonah was at the hospital with Max's mother, Dina Romano. He left and he went to a nearby Ronald McDonald house to sleep. There were reports that loud music was coming from the Spreckles Mansion later that night. And on the morning of July 13th at roughly 6:45 a.m., Adam stated that he found Rebecca's nude body hanging from a balcony with her wrists and ankles bound and her hands behind her back. Rebecca was gagged with a blue long-sleeve t-shirt that was wrapped around her head. The sleeves were double knotted, and the knot was stuffed into her mouth. There was also what appeared to be tape residue on her legs. At 6:48 a.m., Adam called 911, and then he sent a text message to his brother Jonah to inform him of what had happened. He cut down Rebecca's body before the police arrived, and when medics arrived, they attempted to revive her, but they pronounced her dead at the scene. Police initiated forensic and toxicology testing on her body as part of an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Early on, it was speculated that this was foul play, but investigators were unable to find any other DNA at the scene besides Rebecca's. On September 2nd, the San Diego County Sheriff's Department formally announced their finding that Rebecca had committed suicide. Here's the really short list of the evidence that's considered here. And this autopsy report, toxicology and all, it's like 20 pages. It's not very long. Rebecca's autopsy revealed 4 instances of head trauma, and investigators and outside commentators have expressed various theories related to this. San Diego medical examiner Jonathan Lucas stated that there was evidence that she went over the balcony in a non-vertical position, and she may have struck her head on the balcony on the way down. Werner Spitz, who some people may recognize his name from the Casey Anthony trial, he said that that was a possibility, that when the body first dropped, she didn't necessarily jump to her death. So she would drop directly downward and she could easily have hit the side of the structure from which she was hanging, which would include the balcony and a nearby staircase. However, he noted that to draw stronger conclusions, he would have preferred to have seen what the body looked like before the wrist bindings were removed. And on top of that, someone else mentioned they needed to really see the position the body was found in, as opposed to, like, basically when Adam cut her down, there was no way to tell what had really happened. Maurice Godwin chimes in on the wiki page. He's sourced as saying that he expressed doubt, stating the chances of bumping into the railing, going over the balcony, hitting your head 4 times is highly unlikely. I'm hit or miss with Mr. Godwin. He pops up in a lot of true crime things. A second autopsy on Rebecca was conducted by Cyril Wecht, who people may realize also was involved in the Ellen Greenberg case. Wecht testified that he believed fractures in Rebecca's throat were caused by manual strangulation, not by a suicidal hanging. He further stated that he thought that Rebecca's death was a homicide, and an attorney for Zahal's family stated that other inaccuracies were found with the sheriff's department's investigation, including potentially evidence that Rebecca had been sexually assaulted before her death. So I'm just going to point out that if you're seeing a theme here, it's because there is a theme here. And that theme is very similar to the point Meg was making earlier. And as I sort of spool this information out in my spiel, you can tell that, like, there's a lot of common names in here. Cyril Wecht among them. Family members expressed suspicion as to why Rebecca's hands and feet were bound. San Diego Sheriff Roy Frank stated that there were documentations of incidents throughout the country where people have secured their feet and hands as well to commit suicide to prevent themselves from changing their minds. So they've secured their feet, they secure their hands because they don't want to go back. Police reenacted the scenario in an effort to determine whether it could have been possible for Rebecca to bind herself in that fashion. And they showed a video demonstration in which a woman wrapped a rope around her hands several times in front of her, slipped one hand out of the binding, placed her hands behind her back, rebound them, and tightened the bindings with the aid of a string similar to the one which police found in Rebecca's hands. There was a nearby message that was painted on the door of the room leading to the balcony below where police found Rebecca's body. And according to Neil, who is Rebecca's ex-husband, the message said, "She saved him. Can he save her?" And I have since seen, I don't know if this is real photos, but I've seen photos that appear to show paint on a door, a bedroom door, that have that message or something very close to it.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay. I didn't know if it was a recreation or if that was
No, yeah. There's a picture, and there was paint on the. It was weird. Like, it was painted with a paintbrush, and it was,
Yeah, and at one point in time, Sheriff Gore, he did not comment on that. He said he didn't feel like it was a clear suicide note later, and then investigators took it as further evidence of suicide. That was released in 2018. Rebecca liked to paint as hobby, and she signed her paintings. Her siblings say the message didn't match her handwriting, and Neil stated that it didn't appear to be something that Rebecca would have said or written. So police served Verizon and AT&T with search warrants to obtain cell phone billing records, and they took Rebecca's phone for evidence. According to the AT&T records, from 8 to 10, Rebecca talked and texted with her older sister, Mary, and confirmed that Zena, the teenage sister, had arrived home safely. At 10:48 p.m., Rebecca received a text from Nina Romano, who Nina Romano is the twin sister of Dina Romano. Dina Romano is Max's mom and Jonah's ex-wife. So Nina, not Dina, Romano, wanted to stop by the house and talk about Max's accident. So this is the twin sister that wants to stop by. Rebecca didn't reply. They did say that after that, around 12:50 a.m., Rebecca checked her voicemail and listened to a message, but billing records didn't show who left the message. Police stated that it was a message regarding Max's condition getting worse, but they declined to confirm at that time who left the message. The older sister, Mary, stated that the police told her it was from Jonah. The message was deleted, and that basically means that police and the family did not hear the contents of that message. Investigators initially did not attempt to power up or operate the cell phone, fearing they might overwrite evidence contained in the memory. Instead, they tried to determine whether forensic software was available that would allow them to examine that model of Samsung Focus smartphone. On August 15th, unable to identify any such tech, a detective turned on the phone and conducted a manual search of it, finding the voicemail message was not stored on the phone. They didn't request AT&T try to relieve the deleted message from its servers. And on September 21st, later on, an investigator announced they would use some new technology to copy the phone's data for further investigation. And in early October, investigators completed that second examination of the phone, stating they did not uncover any additional information and they would return it to Rebecca's family. That's sort of the rundown on this case. Did you read the autopsy on this one at all?
I did. I read the entire autopsy.
Okay. I found that interesting that Cyril Wecht, again, contradicts, a medical examiner's report.
I don't know if you remember, but I've said this before. I believe it applies to a lot of things. I think I was talking about assholes the last time. Sometimes in life you meet an asshole or two, but if you find that all you're meeting is assholes or are assholes, perhaps it's you. And I would say that if you constantly see something as a homicide that everybody else is calling a suicide, perhaps they're not wrong.
I recently made a comment. So Cyril has written a number of books, and I was speaking to a producer. We were talking about some famous cases that he's worked on. He came up because he asked me what I was working on, and I mentioned the Alan Greenberg thing, and he was talking about someone famous, and I don't know who off the top of my head, and I don't think it's something I could Google, but somebody famous playing Cyril in a movie. And when he said that, I said, it's the movie called I See Murder, because that dude definitely sees a lot of murder. And we kind of had a chuckle about it. But yeah, he's kind of a hired gun in these.
I hope that he's sincere. I really do. I hope that he's sincere in what he's doing. I can't say I'm not somebody that could, take a look at cases and specifically, refute findings of a medical nature. But I'm just saying he's come out quite a bit, actually. And I just hope his efforts are sincere. And I'm not saying anything to say that they're, not sincere. I'm just saying, tunnel vision is a thing for everybody at some point.
I mean, it's hard to look at somebody and go, oh, he's a hired gun or he's not a hired gun. It sort of is what it is. But, he's been around the film industry a long enough time for me to know that he's looking for a little attention. But I don't necessarily think way out there, because he's had some interesting opinions. But he's definitely, I don't know. He's not the type of person that I look at and go, okay, I automatically believe it. But like when he lays things out, sometimes I can come to some of the same conclusions. The problem is it's not a majority of the times. It's like sort of a mixture. And he also has had some interesting legal dealings over the years, but we'll save good old Cyril for another day. But yeah, I think a book written about Cyril Wecht's life that is called I See Murder would definitely be something I would read.
Well, sure.
So the case of Rebecca Zhao, it got a lot of attention. It's very, there's a mansion, there's this beautiful woman, there's a rich guy in the middle of it all. There's questions of, did she kill herself? Did she, do something? Was she killed by someone who was doing something bonkers? There's a lot of religious overtones that come up in this case where they're basically saying, I think the family has some stigma here. The family thinks that because of their particular beliefs that, Rebecca goes to a bad place if she kills herself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they kind of foist on her that Rebecca would never kill herself because she believes suicide was a sin. That comes up. The media attention for this case is a really good description of how true crime access affects everything. It really does.
Oh, do you mean the TV series? One of the cable networks put out a TV series that, I mean, it was like a mini series,
I
like
did not
Death
know
at the
that.
Mansion or something like that. Yeah, it was like a whole thing. Hold on.
Oh, I see it now. I didn't see this before. I didn't. I have not seen this. It's a season of Death at the Mansion that was available
No,
online.
it looks like
Oxygen.
maybe Oxygen. Okay, I couldn't remember if it was. I thought maybe Bravo, but I'll take your word for it. And then it's been on all the true crime type shows. There's quite a bit of irony in that, right? I don't know who's behind that. I don't know. Her
Death at the
case is-
Mansion.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was like pushed because it's like a dramatization of the story that's presented in mainstream media, right? I haven't watched it. I actually don't know.
Well, so can you tell? So I pulled the court records on this because we were talking about something at the beginning. You know that it's Adam that's found responsible, right? Not Jonah.
Yeah, correct. Because the reason that Adam is the one who found her. Adam was the only other person like on the property that night. He wasn't even in the house. He was staying in the guest house. She was in the main house. And then there was an additional house, which was the caretaker's house. And if you have the ability to take a look at some of the information that's out there, the house is kind of formed like a courtyard. And so the place where she was found was within all those buildings. So she wasn't like out in the middle of the neighborhood or whatever, right?
Right.
It was like a sort of interior courtyard. And yes, I'm aware that it was Adam. So Adam is the brother. He comes into town. She picks him up when she drops her younger sister off. I couldn't really find any information as to whether that was the plan or if she went home because of the injury the little boy sustained. I didn't know, and it really doesn't matter. The premise of the lawsuit was that, because Adam was on the property, it basically had to be him. I think there has been a couple spins on, whether the twins stopped by and, that kind of thing. It's interesting because a recent case that I watched, I don't even know what it was, but now they're starting to use, which, I mean, it'll be discredited as soon as it really becomes a thing, but they're starting to use people's smartwatches
Yeah.
to tell if they're taking steps.
Yeah.
And so basically in this particular situation, so if let's say that, if she was murdered, the only people who could have done it was either Adam or the twin, and they had their smartwatches, and during a certain period of time, it would basically show that Adam was asleep up until the 6th something when he got up, right? Because it has a variety of ways to indicate you're not taking steps, that your heart rate's low, that you're sleeping, or however it does it. But that's actually a thing now. And so that would have been really convenient. I'm sure that wasn't a thing in 2011, but because it's narrowed down so much, right? Because you're really only looking at either suicide or Adam did it. And then somebody said maybe the twin sister of the little boy's mom did it or something. I don't even know, but I don't really think that that's a feasible thing. Now, I have a feeling, I mean, maybe it would be relevant to know if her sister was supposed to be going home or not, because I don't believe for a second that there was any sort of smothering, choking, anything like that happened before he went over the side of the railing. And I don't know if you've seen sort of the diagram of how that happened. I don't, I would guess, I don't know anything about this little boy except that he was 6 and it was summertime and he was hanging out with his dad's girlfriend and her sister, right? 14-year-old sister. I would imagine that little boy was climbing on that railing before I would imagine one of those girls being able to choke him and throw him over. I just don't see that happening. I mean, I could be completely wrong. I have a feeling that I don't know much about Jonah or his ex-wife, the mother of the child who died. But as a parent, regardless of the actual circumstances of the situation, you don't really take into consideration the fact that you weren't there for whatever reason. You're going to cast some blame on whoever was supposed to be watching your child.
Oh, yeah. The sheer grief or rage that's going to come out is not going to be mutable. You're not going to be able to cover that up.
No. And so I think she probably got it from everybody as far as, see, she could have not done anything wrong and she already felt guilty about it. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
And like, there's no question because, he was 6. So in theory, there shouldn't have been a problem there with him running around while she's in the bathroom, but you just never know. And I feel like as a parent, you would immediately blame the caretaker. She felt terrible. And then initially, so I've read quite a bit of information, and initially, like, she administered CPR on him, apparently. It was said, like, oh, you saved his life. She was, like, sort of praised a little bit. I mean, not that there's a lot of praising happening there under the circumstances, because essentially, even if she did render life resuscitating measures, the paramedics came and took him to the hospital, and he was put into a coma. And he was medically induced into a coma because, like, brain swelling. So she initially thought like things were going to be better. And then the phone call came and the prognosis had taken a turn. I would be interested to know, like, if mom's twin sister, like, was she going to like reassure her that it wasn't her fault, or was she going to rip her a new one? Those are the only 2 ways I see a conversation like that going. Like, I want to come by and talk about Max's accident. It's not going to be, it's either going to be like a comforting type thing, which I doubt that very seriously. I don't see the aunt of the little boy with, the other side, from the other side, talking to the girlfriend of the father going well in this situation. If that's what was sort of looming there, I imagine Adam, the brother, he flew in because it was serious, right? It was serious enough. He felt like his brother needed his support, at least initially. What went down between them? Well, if you ask her family, a lot went down, right? There's been allegations of sexual assault. The autopsy indicated that there wasn't a sexual assault.
Yeah, no, there was some indication that people are interpreting some of the there's some interesting things going on in her reproductive system that are being interpreted as possibly sexual assault. I don't think they were looking at it. I could be persuaded otherwise with some more evidence, but from what I read in the autopsy report, I don't see a sexual assault. I was just going to say, here's what I think happened. I think Rebecca went to the bathroom and Xena was trying to entertain Max, or trying to tell Max to get off the damn railing. And either scenario, I think, results in Max falling. And I think what they were talking about in some of this, there's some mention of Max along the way here. Ultimately, I think Max was grabbed, like trying to keep him from falling. Like he slipped, had a hand on, somebody reached down and grabbed his shirt, pulled his shirt, trying to pull him back up, which is actually worse in this situation because when you lose that control and somebody falls, 15 feet that way, and it's a small body, the body's going to spin differently than if he had just fallen. And I think that's what they're regarding as like potentially being suffocation or strangulation, is the attempt to not let him fall. So then when he does fall, it's bad. It's on Xena. Rebecca feels guilty because she had let Xena and Max do whatever. And I don't think anybody did anything wrong. I think there was a kid being a kid, and then like a semi-adult and an adult that were just dealing with the kid. I suspect that if the twin was coming by, it was, hey, what happened? And get the fuck out. Don't come back here. You know, your time with us, with his family is done, regardless of the situation.
Right. And,
you know, that's
like,
how I picture it, because that's, you know, Aunt Nina.
right. And yeah, I could totally see that happening. I think that that probably carried over. And now, to our knowledge, that contact was not made. There was just a phone call made, and it was, or a text message sent, and it wasn't returned or whatever.
Yeah, the thing about people, like sometimes people who are in power in large corporations have certain types of personalities. And those personalities, without judging anybody, don't do well under personal pressure. Business pressure, that's what they thrive in. But when it comes to personal, emotional distress, and I'm talking about everybody in this situation. I don't know. The one guy operated a tugboat. I don't know how that works for him. But for the other people, the message that's on Jonah's phone is probably not very nice.
The message from Jonah to Rebecca.
Yeah, it's probably not very nice. And I actually think that Rebecca was punishing herself and did kill herself. At first, I even looked at this and went, I wonder if this is like one of those things you and I talked about where it's like some sort of revenge suicide. But the more I dig, and if you guys want to read this, like if the audience wants to read this, there are lots of documents available that are very recent documents, but they sprawl backwards in time all the way to the day this happened. You can go online. I know autopsyfiles.org had her autopsy up. And then I know in the California courts, there are 3 filings in different parts of 2021. They're very different, but one of them, and there's a 4th filing that's like an amended motion. They're amending one of the original complaints. You can go on and find those if you just Google Rebecca Zahau, Zahau family lawsuit, mid-year, like summertime, and then again in November. Multiple news outlets in the area in California, San Diego, San Francisco, California, they carried all of the links to the court documents. And if you want to read the whole thing, you can go in there and read the whole thing. This is a very emotional affair that never should have been an 11-part or 10-part series or whatever it was. I don't know how many episodes it was.
It's insane.
This is an absolutely tragic death of a 6-year-old. And I guess Rebecca she was born in 1978. So when this happened, she would have been in her early 30s.
34.
Okay. So this is an absolutely tragic situation. And the suicide here came directly from
guilt.
Yeah.
And it's been said, I've seen her sister talk about it, that her sister like absolutely would never have committed suicide. She was, she was Protestant, and, she held Christian beliefs that, suicide would have her going to hell or whatever. And I have seen that. And I just want to say, the sister's account of her sister is probably like 100% accurate. The issue is that she's thinking of her sister before her sister's boyfriend's son fell while in her care. And that's what I started getting at the beginning, is like, you have no idea how somebody that you know is going to react to something tragic like that. Right? You have no idea like how, because it fundamentally changes you. Like if you're a human being, yes, I can see sort of from a third party perspective that she really wasn't at fault. Perhaps she should have been doing a little more to make sure he didn't do that. But like, she had to go to the bathroom. He was 6 and her 14-year-old sister was around somewhere, right? Yeah. I could see where I would feel incredibly guilty that happened on my watch, so to speak. But at the same time, I can see where it's not necessarily like unthinkable that it occurred. I mean, your goal would always to be to make sure your 6-year-old in any 6-year-old in your presence doesn't fall like that, right? It's weird. The whole fall thing was weird. It wasn't a normal thing that would happen. It didn't. We'll never know, really. And I don't think Rebecca committing suicide lends anything towards like her, like malicious culpability. Like, I don't think she threw Max over the stair rail or whatever. I don't think she committed suicide because she could not handle that situation. And the reason she bound her legs and her feet and she did all the different things that she did, like she had a shirt in her mouth. The naked thing was a little bit weird. I feel like she did all of that because she wanted to guarantee success.
Yeah, she didn't take any chances. And I hope a large majority of the people who listen here have never experienced the death of a small person in their life. This situation where, okay, so Rebecca and Jonah have been together for some time. And not only have they been together for some time, Jonah trusts her with this child, a 6-year-old child that she has known. I think it said 2008 was when they started seeing each other. So she would have known this 6-year-old child since just before he turned 3 years old. I know people can associate, I lost someone my age, or I lost someone older, or, this person passed away. There is something really compounding about the loss of a child for the people who are immediately related to the child. But step parents, and I'm not saying they were married or anything like that, I'm just saying step parents, people who come into the lives as a secondary caregiver, meaning the kid has parents, and in this instance, aunts and uncles, and also potentially nannies or whatever. But when you're seeing a parent who has, you're seeing someone who has a child, you're in a very peculiar spot to begin with, because kids come with attachments to things that you'll never really necessarily understand. When you've been there for 2-3 years and something happens to that child, you are the easiest target in the room. And
they were spitting fireball. And I'm not saying that wouldn't have I think that would have kind of gone away, right? Like over time.
Oh, absolutely.
But, right when it first happens, because as a parent, you're immediately going to feel guilty that you weren't there, right? That you had left your child with another person, the mom and the dad, both. And then, it becomes this like undescribable situation where I have no doubt everybody was mad at her. She was mad at herself. She was probably taking it from everybody because she felt like she deserved it. I mean, and here's another thing that I actually just sort of realized, because I had forgotten about her being religious and that being a main component of why they didn't want her to have committed suicide. But you said that on the wall was written, "She saved him, can you save her?" Right? With black paint. It was scrawled on the wall.
You're getting to my ending, aren't you?
I don't know, but my thought was that she did attempt to save Max, right? And so she was asking for forgiveness for what she was about to do.
I don't think so. So I spun this a different way than you did. I even went what if they didn't get mad? And I actually think that could even make it worse. What if everybody seemed okay and was trying to reassure her? First of all, that probably means she's showing signs of distress. And the idea that she wasn't depressed when this had just happened is out the window. That's one of the main points in the civil complaint that the family has filed, was that they disagreed that she would be depressed. They're wrong. There's no way you would not be depressed.
absolutely deprived. It was, even if it was just situational, a child that she was in charge of was going to die, basically, because and it didn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter if she tried to grab him and save him, or if he fell like on his own. I mean, unless she picked him up and threw him over the side, which I just don't think that happened. She was depressed. There's no question.
I have a completely different interpretation of the message that was written in black paint.
Okay, yeah.
And tell me if this rings familiar for you or not. I think this is Rebecca's thought pattern. I think Rebecca was thinking, Xena saved Max. Can Jonah save Xena? Because I think what it was going to boil down to is Rebecca believed that Xena was going to be blamed for Max's death and arrested. And that was what pushed her even further when she found out that Max had taken a turn for the worse.
See, yeah, I mean, I can see that. That's not how I interpret it. I mean, I agree that that's how it could be. And that's where, like, it would be relevant as to whether or not that, you know, trip home was last minute, or was that when she was supposed to go home, or like what's going on there.
Yeah.
I also think, though, that unless there's some like serious underlying issues here, okay, a 14-year-old girl is not going to maliciously murder a 6-year-old boy. It's just not going to happen. I mean, unless, like I said,
I don't think it was malicious.
No. Yeah, no. I mean, and so in my thinking, and, you know, I'll just use this opportunity to say, you know, if something happened and they were, you know, play fighting and she accidentally pushed him and it was a little too hard and he fell like that way, you should always be honest about stuff like that, because it was an accident. Like, kids are kids, right? I mean, you shouldn't be pushing a 14-year-old shouldn't be pushing a 6-year-old.
Yeah, but that's where I think like the twin sister coming in, Aunt Nina coming in, I think that plays into this, because I'm not saying anybody even lied, but like, what if what happened was just fucking bizarre?
Well, I think that's covered. I think it was bizarre.
I'm just saying with Max, I'm saying like, what if it was Xena threw a ball and Max was running and the dog was barking at him and ran past him, and Max tripped over the dog and couldn't right himself and then stepped on the ball and fell over the side. Because guys, the reason I bring that up is those are two of the things that were posited by the sheriff.
See, I had trouble believing that he could have, short of being climbing on the railing, I have a hard time seeing how he fell over it. I mean, of course, 6-year-old little boys climb on railings. I mean, they do all kinds of things. I don't know anything about him particularly, but it was kind of high for him to have, because you got to think leverage wise. The railing, you know, they make builders put railings on stairs so children don't fall. And so naturally it would be too high for him to just naturally fall over. Now, you know, tripping or, you know, see, tripping means you're going towards the floor. So that doesn't actually get him up higher, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it doesn't seem to have been brought into question, basically, because it's like he died and then actually it was like she died and then, you know, he died a couple days later. And so I haven't seen where there's been a lot of fighting about what occurred. It doesn't seem like they bring Xena into it at all. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like, if that was the case, that there was anything. If that was the case, then he saved her, because she was not prosecuted for it. It never came up. And, you know, I don't even want to say, like, I don't even really want to posit it, because she was a kid, right?
Oh, I don't think she did it on purpose. I think, like, if you're 34 years old looking at your 14-year-old sister, you can think to yourself, she's going to be blamed for this. And then, like, that can send you into a tailspin, because the reason I even bring it up is because then you're not even dealing with the 6-year-old who has had this terrible accident. You're finding out he potentially has taken a turn for the worse when you thought he was saved, because Rebecca doesn't know that Max dies. Rebecca's dead before then. But
right, but I think somebody said, like, they don't think he's going to make it. I think that's the call.
So the call saying they don't think he's going to make it, that's what tailspins you, because then you think, oh my God, not only is this little boy going to die, but like now I'm going to lose her too if they blame her. It doesn't matter if she really did anything or not. It's the perception that Rebecca would have in the grief and the anxiety over all of that.
Well, going that route, I mean, her relationship with Jonah was over at that point as well, because no matter what, she wouldn't have been able to live with the guilt associated with it. Let alone, I don't know what his reaction would have been. It doesn't really matter. But like her whole life basically just tailspinned out of control at that point.
Everything changed. Whatever happened to Max, everything changed Rebecca's life in an instant.
Yeah, it's really terrible. But I believe from the information that's out there, I believe that she wasn't someone who they would have immediately pinpointed to say like, oh yeah, she committed suicide. But I do think she committed suicide, and I think she did it in a way that she was alleviating some of the pain that she was in from all the incidents, right? And I think that if she had realized what was going to happen, like her case is a famous case. Like it's like I said, it was a TV series. It's been on. It's a mainstream true crime case. If she had known that is what was going to happen, I'd like to think she wouldn't have done it, but I think she would have made it very clear that she was in fact committing suicide and that she would not want this attention on her.
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
Yeah, I think that was one of the hardest things about this is despite like the tangential timing and Cyril Wecht relationship to Ellen Greenberg, I think this is a case of a person who had no idea of the true crime excess that would come out of her life story. And the portrayal of her, I have a feeling, is completely out of line in a lot of ways. I don't know her personally. I don't know anything about her. I just know that like when it comes to things like the story, it's very common for things to suddenly become very sensational, and
this has a lot of elements to that. I mean, to something that has the potential to be sensational. Plus, you've got a family that I believe they genuinely want to do everything they possibly can, like for their sister, and it's just not the right thing. I mean, I just don't believe she would have wanted this, and I don't even know her, but that whole situation is very sad. And I hope that I'm hoping, so where this kind of lands is, the reason it sort of come up is because it's, a suicide that's questioned. And right now there's a civil, it's a case before the court, and a judge has ordered that the entire investigation, the case file be produced, or why certain parts of the case file can't be produced to be, documented on the record. And I hope that they'll take the opportunity to really kind of narrow down what the family's looking for and tell them that it doesn't exist if that is in fact the case.
Yeah, one of the things that, in addition to the religious behavior, one of the other things that comes up frequently in the complaint and the amended complaint was the sheriff giving no weight to the message that I think they were saying there's no. It was sort of a double-sided sword they were playing with, them being the family and the family's attorneys, where if the message means something, then either Rebecca was trying to send it or someone else wrote it. And their stance was that Rebecca never would have written that message because they didn't understand it. And the sheriff came out, and so did the family, and they all said collectively, we don't understand this message. But I think the meaning of the message is, I think it's a crucial point in this case, and I think that would, like you're saying, it would alleviate some of the problem.
Do you think that Xena could perhaps, I mean, she would be older now. She would be in her early 20s. Do you think
I think
Sheila
Xena knows. I think Xena would know and could explain it to her family what the message meant. But I think that message is simply Xena saved Max, because at the time Rebecca believed that Max was going to live, or possibly had been saved. She did not know he was dead yet, but it could be that she knew something bad had happened. But Xena saved Max. Can you save Xena? That's what the message means.
voice, hear it echo. We know where we come from, we know Would you be the last benevolent mouthpiece? Heaven knows we need you now. Would you be the most beautiful consequence of a world that's coming down? Would you be the last benevolent mouthpiece? Heaven knows we need you now. Would you be the most beautiful consequence of a world that's coming down? Standing up on our own for the things we know. Raise a voice, hear it echo. Raise a voice, hear it echo.